Alhamdulillah wa salatu wa salamu ala rasulillah amma ba'd. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu. Brothers and sisters, welcome back to another episode of Iftar with Imran. And inshallah ta'ala I'll be joining you hopefully every single day of this month of Ramadan whilst we are locked down due to COVID-19. But inshallah ta'ala I will be with you inshallah ta'ala in your houses. And don't worry, it is still maintaining social distancing because I'm only on the video. I'm not actually in your house in case anyone got it wrong. So inshallah I'll be joining you inshallah ta'ala, and every day I'm sharing a hadith with you. I want to share a different hadith with you about fasting and about the month of Ramadan. Does that make sense? And this will hopefully motivate you and keep you engaged and keep your spirits high and your aspiration high to really go hard when it comes to this Ramadan at home. So yesterday we took a hadith that taught us the obligation of fasting, the ruling of fasting, and then we added some wisdoms. We understood some wisdoms of fasting. Today inshallah ta'ala we're going to learn the reality of fasting. What is it? Okay, we know that we have to do it. That's what we learned yesterday. But what is fasting? We're going to actually define it today. And the reason why it's important to do so is because a lot of us have been fasting our whole lives. But if I was to ever ask most people, hey, what is the definition of fasting? Like, what is it? It's not as simple as just not eating food and drink. There's actually a lot more to it. And if you don't know what the definition of fasting is, how do you know you've really been fasting? How do you know you haven't broken your fast? How do you know you even started your fasting? You don't really know what fasting is. Does that make sense? I'm not saying you. Inshallah you do know, but inshallah it will be a reminder for you. But some people, they don't know. Does that make sense? So inshallah ta'ala today we're going to learn the reality of what is fasting. And through this a lot is going to become clear. So firstly, let's start with the linguistic definition of fasting. The linguistic definition in the Arabic language of fasting. So the Arabic word used for fasting is siyam. Okay, now siyam linguistically means mutlaqul imsak, which basically means any type of withholding from anything, whether it be speech, whether it be walking, whether it be whatever you withhold from, you have done imsak, and therefore we say you are fasting. For example, Maryam salamun alayha, when she mentioned that she has taken a vow to not speak to anyone, she said, Inni nadartu lirrahmani sawma. Inni nadartu lirrahmani sawma. I have taken a vow with Ar-Rahman that I will fast. Fast what? Fast what? فَلَنْ أُكَلِّمَ الْيَوْمَ إِنْسِيًّا. I will not speak to any human being today. Does that make sense? I'm not going to speak to anyone. So she considered herself as someone who's fasting because she wasn't talking. And the Arabs, for example, when they were talking about their horses, if a horse, they would talk about their horses in their poetries, and their horses would be fasting. So one would ask, how does a horse fast? Nabigatu al-Dhubyani, who was one of the great poets of the Arabs, and his poetry used to actually be written in the Kaaba before the Prophet ﷺ came with Islam. You know, they used to have the mu'allaqat, the poetry that were very, very high to them and very respected. They would have it written in ink of gold. They would be hung at the Kaaba. So Nabigatu al-Dhubyani, he was one of those poets where his poetry was written, and he actually has a poetry about a horse that fasts. Again, how, look, he said, خَيْلٌ صَائِمٌ وَخَيْلٌ غَيْرَ صَائِمَةٍ تحت العجاج وأخرى تعلو كل جماء نعم. He mentions a horse that is fasting and a horse that's not fasting. How is a horse not fasting? He said he's being held back from his reins that are on his mouth. You know the horse, when he has the reins on the mouth and you pull it back, what happens to the horse? It slows down. It's charging. You pull back the reins from his mouth. What happens? It stops. It starts to withhold itself from moving. In other words, it is fasting from moving. Does that make sense? So according to the Arabic language, any type of withholding of something, whether it be speech, whether it be movement, whether it be food, whether it be drink, is considered siyam, fasting. Does that make sense? Now, of course, when we talk about fasting in the month of Ramadan, and fasting the way the Prophet ﷺ would fast on the Mondays and the Thursdays, and fasting of Dawood, which is one day on, one day off, and fasting on the day of Arafah and the day of Ashura, we do not mean any type of withholding. Does that make sense? So what type of withholding are we referring to or rather is Allah and the Prophet ﷺ referring to in the Quran and the Sunnah when they say fast? They're talking about withholding from specific things. Does that make sense? What are these specific things? There are three primary main things that you withhold yourself from when you fast. Three main things. There's more than three, but there's seven in fact, and I'm going to mention all seven to you today. But all of the others, generally speaking, they revolve around the three. Does that make sense? And we'll talk about it inshallah ta'ala when we come to it. But let's mention the first three, because these three are the usul. There's a hadith in which the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, "Kullu amal ibn Adam yudha'af." Every single action of the children of Adam is multiplied. Okay? Al-hasanatu bi ashri amthaliha. It can be multiplied up to 10. Does that make sense? إلى 700 ضعف. It can be multiplied from 10 up to 700. So look how generous and merciful Allah is. You do one action, Allah Azza wa Jalla can take it from 10 and multiply up to 700 times. But there's an exception. One action is not multiplied up to 700. No. It's multiplied more than 700. What is it? The Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, then Allah said, إِلَّا الصَّوْمِ, except for fasting. Why? فَإِنَّهُ لِي, because it is for me. It is for me. It is for me. Okay? وَأَنَا أَجْزِي بِهِ, and I will personally reward it. And that shows how big the reward is going to be, and we'll talk about that in the next episode inshallah ta'ala. But that's not our point of discussion today. Our point of discussion is, what is the definition of fasting? So then the next part, Allah, He explains what it is. The Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam said that Allah said, and the hadith is in Al-Bukhari, Muslim by the way, that Allah said, يَدُعُ شَهْوَتَهُ وَطَعَامَهُ مِنْ أَجْلِي, that the person, he left off his desires and his food and of course drink for my sake. Does that make sense? So these are the three things that are the usul of the things that will, the foundational things that you have to stay away from, that you have to do imsak with regards to. Does that make sense? And that is food, that is drink, and desires. Now pay attention, what does desires here mean? Because sleep is a desire. Does that make sense? Going for a walk could be a desire. It's talking about sexual intercourse. It's talking about sexual intercourse. Does that make sense? Jima'. It's talking about that. So, if a person engages in jima', which is sexual intercourse with their spouse, and of course if they, in the month of Ramadan, it will be haram. It's actually a major sin. And we'll talk about that when the time comes. And imagine a person who does it with their girlfriend or their boyfriend. They're not even married to them. That's even greater. May Allah protect us of such evil. I mean, the point here is that the three things that we are withholding ourselves from during the fasting is food, drink, and sexual intercourse. Does that make sense? We also have an ayah in the Quran that affirms this, where Allah Azza wa Jalla, He said, فَالْآنَ بَاشِرُوهُنَّ وَابْتَغُوا مَا كَتَبَ اللَّهُ لَكُمْ وَكُلُوا وَاشْرَبُوا حَتَّى يَتَبَيَّنَ لَكُمُ الْخَيْطُ الْأَبْيَضُ مِنَ الْخَيْطِ الْأَسْوَدِ مِنَ الْفَجْرِ ثُمَّ أَتِمُّوا الصِّيَامَ إِلَى اللَّيْلِ. Allah Azza wa Jalla mentioned that when the Fajr time kicks in, you have to complete your fast. And now you are not allowed to have sexual intercourse, and now you are not allowed to eat, and now you are not allowed to drink. Does that make sense? Now, pay attention. What is considered food or drink? Food or drink is anything that goes into your mouth or your nose and it makes its way to your stomach. It goes into your body, and the reason I mentioned mouth and stomach is because the mouth and the stomach is generally the gateway to the body. But if the point here is that if it goes into your stomach, or let's say it doesn't go into your stomach, but it does that which food does, i.e. it gives you energy, it gives you nutrition. Does that make sense? Then this right here would be considered food or drink. So for example, a person takes some nose drops and they put them in their nose. What's going to happen with the nose drops? They're going to go where? From the nose, it goes into your stomach. That's why sometimes, when you're, for example, in the sea swimming, or in a swimming pool, or even in the bathtub, and the water goes up your nose, you swallow it from your nose. But your mouth is closed. How? Because from your nose, it can go down. Does that make sense? And that's why the Prophet ﷺ said that, when you do the wudu, when you do the istinshaq, take the water into your nose, okay? And go far up. You should take the water as high as you can into your nose when you do wudu. إِلَّا أَن تَكُونَ صَائِمًا, except when you're fasting. Why? Because if you take it too high, what happens? It can go down, it can break your fast. Does that make sense? It can break your fast. So it's important that and of course if it happens accidentally and the person didn't do it intentionally, then of course that's not an issue. If a person eats intentionally, that's not an issue at all. But it's important to know that something that goes into your mouth or your nose and makes its way to your stomach, or it does that which food or drink does, i.e. it gives you energy and nutrition, then that thing right there is something that breaks the fast. Does that make sense? Now straight away we would now know, and this is what the scholars have mentioned, that an asthma pump would not break the fast because it doesn't go into your stomach. If anything goes into your lungs, does that make sense? But it doesn't go into your stomach. Toothpaste will not break your fast because you don't swallow it. As long as you don't swallow it, it's not an issue. Does that make sense? So the point here is that food or drink, you have to stay away from it. That's the first thing. The second thing is sexual intercourse, and that's pretty clear, okay? That is, when the private parts of two people, they meet and they engage in intercourse. So we're talking about the actual act there. Does that make sense? And pay attention. Some people think that as long as they don't ejaculate and they just engage in intimacy without ejaculation, the fast is not broken, because they think ejaculation is what's needed required to break the fast. You have to understand something, that the Sharia, there's a qaida that Imam As-Suyuti rahimahullah, he brings in his Al-Ashbah wal-Nadha'ir, that when it comes to Taghib al-Hashafa, which is penetration, right? And the penetration is enough for the man's intimate organ, for the head of it, for the top of for the head part of it to be inserted inside of his wife's organ. Does that make sense? It doesn't even have to be an entire complete penetration, just enough for the top part of it to be inserted, such that the top part of it can now no longer be seen. Is considered penetration. And that type of penetration, Imam Suyuti rahimahullah ta'ala said that there is no situation in which we differ between ejaculation and penetration. Meaning that some people think, for example, I don't have to do ghusl if I didn't ejaculate. Does that make sense? He said, no. Whether you ejaculate or not, we don't differ. Does that make sense? There's only one situation in which there's a differing, and we'll separate between what happens if you ejaculate and what happens if you don't ejaculate. And that's an issue that's not even relevant to people nowadays in this day and age, so I'm not even going to mention it because it's going to go off on topic. But generally speaking, if a man penetrates his spouse, does that make sense, to the point that where just the top part of it has been inserted inside of his spouse, then that would now necessitate that he is penetrated, and all of the rulings that would apply if he ejaculated apply if he penetrated. Does that make sense? So don't differ between the two. Does that make sense? Also, some people think that if they wear, for example, contraception, they wear like these contraceptive coverings that they put onto their organs when they engage in intercourse, that they say, look, I haven't really touched her. Does that make sense? So my ghusl is not broken, my fast is not broken. We say all of this is nonsense, because the issue here is not about whether you're wearing some kind of a covering on your organ. Does that make sense? It's not about that. Nor is it about whether you ejaculate or not. It's about the mere penetration that takes place. And that what is the extent of penetration? It is the head of the man's organ being inserted into his spouse's organ, such that it can no longer be seen. As in the head, as in he's put it in. Does that make sense? I think everyone kind of knows what we're talking about here. So don't play around with the Sharia of Allah Azza wa Jal, because doing that in Ramadan, wallahi, is a big, you're fasting, you can do it in Ramadan after you broke your fast, but during the time when you're fasting, wallahi, it's a big sin that will cause a person to burn in the hellfire. Because the companion who fell into it, he came running to the Prophet ﷺ after he done it. He said, ihtaraqtu. He said, I've been burnt. Meaning what? By the hellfire. Does that make sense? Because I fell into it. Asabtu ahli fi Ramadan. I inflicted my spouse in Ramadan. I fell into intercourse with my wife in Ramadan. And the Prophet ﷺ didn't say, no, you haven't been burnt. He affirmed it for him. But then he showed him a way to expiate his sin after, which is why he was saved. Radiyallahu anhu. So that's the third thing. So the first thing is eating and drinking. The second thing is intercourse. The third thing is what? Ejaculation. Ejaculation. Does that make sense? Because ejaculation also comes under desires, in the sense where it's a offshoot of sexual desire. It's an offshoot of sexual intimacy. Does that make sense? So now pay attention. Jima is the mere penetration. Ejaculation is something that happens even without penetration. It will break your fast. Now pay attention. The ejaculation is of two types. There's the type of ejaculation that happens when you're fasting that breaks your fast, and there's the type of ejaculation that happens when you're fasting that does not break your fast. And each one of these categories have three that fall under it. Let me repeat that one more time. Ikhrajul mani, which is ejaculation. Okay, there is a type which breaks the fast, and there's a type which does not break the fast. The type that breaks the fast breaks up into three, and the type that does break the fast also breaks up into three. So let's talk about the type that breaks your fast, and there are three of them. Number one, it is when a person ejaculates as a result of them foreplaying and being intimate. In other words, hanky-panky, in touchy-feely or whatnot, with their spouse. So for example, they groping, touching, maybe, foreplay, whatever have you, and as a result of that, due to arousal, one or the other ejaculates. That ejaculation is what? That ejaculation is now something that will break the fast. Does that make sense? The second, because you provoked it. The second type of ejaculation that breaks the fast is due to masturbation. Does that make sense? Again, because you provoked that ejaculation. The third type of ejaculation that breaks the fast is بتكرار النظر. When a person, he keeps looking at haram, he keeps looking at a woman, he keeps looking at a woman, he gets turned on so much that what? He ejaculates. Or he's watching some filthy things online, he watches the videos, he gets so aroused that what? He ejaculates. Same with a woman. So بتكرار النظر, because again, you're provoking this. It's not natural. It's not something that's happening outside of your control. You're making this happen. So again, the 3 types of ejaculation that break your fast is إخراج المني, due to ejaculation, due to what? Foreplay. Right? Number 2, due to masturbation. Number 3, due to constantly looking at that which is haram. The 3 types of ejaculation that are not a problem if it happens, it does not break your fast, is an ejaculation that happens due to a wet dream. You wake up, you see, oh snap, subhanallah, you have to do ghusl, but it doesn't break your fast because it wasn't intentional. The other type of ejaculation that does not break your fast is ejaculation due to thoughts. A person just fell into having thoughts about intercourse and intimacy with their spouse, and then suddenly what happens? They ejaculated. Again, we'll say not an issue, because the Prophet ﷺ said, إِنَّ اللَّهَ تَجَاوَزَ عَنْ أُمَّتِي مَا حَدَّثَتْ بِهِ أَنفُسَهَا, that Allah Azza wa Jal has pardoned my ummah for the thoughts that it thinks to itself. مَا لَمْ تَعْمَلْ أو تتكلم, as long as you do not act upon those thoughts and you do not vocalize and verbalize those thoughts. So if it was just a mere thought, Allah will forgive you for it. And if you ejaculate because of your thoughts, then you're not going to be held to account. And the final one, which is a type of ejaculation that happens, and if it happens it doesn't break your fast, it is what? It is ejaculation due to looking at something once, looking at a woman once, and then you ejaculated. Because remember, the Prophet ﷺ said that we're forgiven for the first look, because that's like accidental. It could be accidental. You're just walking, you look, oh, I didn't mean to look, but some brothers, for them, they look, and it's just very easy for them to just, ejaculate. So he looks, and subhanAllah, he has an accident. We say, brother, you're forgiven. Sister, in that regard, you're forgiven, inshallah ta'ala, because it was not something that was in your control. Does that make sense? So, ejaculation, it breaks the fast, but there's a type that breaks the fast, type that doesn't break the fast. 3 that break the fast, 3 that don't break the fast. Go back and review it, inshallah ta'ala, if you missed it. The 4th thing that breaks the fast is hayd and nifas. Okay, it's postnatal bleeding or menstrual blood or menstrual bleeding. Does that make sense? And the hadith is clear with regards to this hadith from Aisha radiallahu anha, whatever have you. And again, what is the wisdom behind it being something that breaks the fast and a woman not being able to fast in this situation? Is because, remember, the Sharia has already told you to not eat or drink. Now, if you're not eating or drinking, you're not putting anything into your body. Now imagine you're not putting anything into your body, but at the same time you're losing the nutrients that are within inside of your body. That's going to make it harder for you. So when a woman, she loses blood, she loses iron, she loses a lot of things, and that makes her weaker, and that can make her weaker. So now it would be very difficult for her to withhold from food and drink while she's also not being able to hold on to the nutrients that are already in her body that are coming out of her due to the blood that's coming out of her. Does that make sense? So the religion wants to make it easy for her, and she's not allowed to fast in that situation or break her fast. Does that make sense? The 6th thing that will break the fast, and obviously it's different upon, but to take the safest view is to just avoid it, is hijama. Because again, hijama, the blood cupping, it's the same principle. You're removing blood from yourself, and with hijama, a lot of blood generally comes out. And what happens is that blood, when it comes out, that when it's a lot, what will happen? It will take the nutrients away from you. Does that make sense? It will make you weaker. And Allah Azza wa Jalla doesn't want to make you weaker, such that Allah said, "La tulqu bi aydikum ila tahluka." Do not throw yourself into destruction with your own hands. Does that make sense? And the 7th thing that will break the fast, the 4th thing is menstrual blood and postnatal bleeding. The 5th thing is hijama, and the 6th thing is intentionally vomiting. And again, the same principle, because when you vomit, you're vomiting your nutrients that are inside of you. So again, it's going to make you weaker, so it will destroy your fast. And the hadith, which is in Abu Dawood and Tirmidhi, Sunan ibn Majah and whatnot, Imam Ahmad narrates it. There's a discussion on its authenticity, lakin it doesn't matter because there's an ijma'. Imam al-Khattabi rahimahullah ta'ala, Imam al-Mundhiri, they mentioned there's an ijma', unanimous consensus that this is something that breaks the fast. Does that make sense? And the 7th and final thing is changing your intention. Changing your intention, changing your intention. If you was to change your intention, it will break your fast, because you intended to fast. Now you say, oh, I'm not fasting anymore, I'm going to break. So for example, you've got food in front of you and you make an intention. It's not a thought. There's a difference between a thought and just an intention. An intention is a resolve. You make an intention, you know what, I'm not going to fast today, I'm done, I'm going to eat this, and you haven't eaten it. Your fast will break just merely on the intention changing. Does that make sense? So that is the things that break the fast. Does that make sense? So based on this which I've mentioned to you so far, the scholars, they came up with a nice definition for fasting. They came up with a nice definition, and the definition is 5 parts, and we'll end on this. It is, number 1, at-ta'abbudu lillah. It is to worship Allah Azza wa Jal, to enslave yourself and serve Allah Azza wa Jal. Okay? How? Bil-imsak, by withholding. Withholding what? Anil akli wa shurbi wal jima', from withholding from food, drink, and sexual intercourse. وَسَائِرِ الْمُفَطِّرَاتِ. Number 4, and the other things that break your fast, that come under the headings of the initial 3 things, and whatever have you, even if it doesn't come under the heading, but it breaks the fast. And the 5th thing is مِنَ الْطُلُوعِ الْفَجْرِ إِلَى غُرُوبِ الشَّمْسِ, from the time the sun rises to the time when the sun sets. Now at this point, I'd like to direct your attention to something important, and that is the issue of the 18-degree rule. A lot of people have been plagued with the concept of the 18-degree rule. If you don't know what I'm talking about, alhamdulillah, don't get involved, inshallah ta'ala. But there's those who know what I'm talking about, and those are the people who they start fasting extremely early. So they start fasting at like 1:30 a.m., 2 a.m. because they say that the sun rises. They say Fajr starts at that time. Okay. Now I'm not going to go into that topic right now, because I believe Ustad Muawiyah Taka has done huge justice to the topic. So he recorded like a 4-part series where he broke it down through the text and through the scientific reality of when Fajr really kicks in. So watch this series. It's a very short series. You can probably finish it all in less than an hour. It's 4 videos. But it's hugely beneficial. And that will clear that issue up for you as to when Fajr really starts. Does that make sense? Because that is part of the definition of fasting. With that said, inshallah ta'ala, before we conclude, I want to ask you guys, I'm raising money for an orphanage for girls in Gambia. It's an orphanage that will teach them how to become hufad of the Quran. It will teach them basic things of life. It's with the Spot Academy, which is run by Brother Abu Bakr Islam from Roadside to Islam. He already set up a boys' orphanage. One of the boys already become a hafiz of the Quran. Another one's about to become a hafiz. You know, they're really learning and developing and growing so much. Like imagine right now with COVID-19, even in Gambia, you know, these orphans, they would, if it wasn't for the orphanage, they would be going back to places that would be very, very dangerous for them. But now because they have an orphanage, they're able to stay there and benefit and stay safe. And well, amazing. So they want to set up an orphanage for the girls. And we know the Prophet ﷺ said, anyone who takes care of an orphan will be like this with me. You want to be like this with the Prophet in Jannah? On Day of Judgment, do you want to be with the Prophet like this? Sponsor an orphanage, inshallah ta'ala. Please donate at the link below. We're trying to build this orphanage. I said I want to raise the whole 70k myself. So please, don't embarrass me, guys. Don't embarrass me. I promised, I pledged that I'm going to raise this, and I don't want to let those orphan girls down. I don't want to let them down, and I want you guys to help me not let them down with the permission of Allah. So please donate at the link below, inshallah ta'ala. سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك أشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت أستغفرك وأتوب إليك. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.